This is Ed Robinson of Kensington College, continuing our lessons on Excel VBA. We'll be talking about getting a hold of data from a database. In fact, it's an access database, but using Excel VBA. And the thing we'll be using to do that is DAO, which is Data Access Objects, a Microsoft product. So let's start off by creating a database. So I can see my access here, so I'll double click on that to get access going. And I'm going to choose a blank database, and I'm going to call it test. And I'm going to make sure I know where it's located. It's quite important. So let me just go browsing to the location, which in my case will be the temp folder, and I can save it as test, and then I need to create the database. Okay, well, I've got a table there. I'm not too keen on that. I'll just get rid of that. I'm going to create my own table. So I'm going to create using table design, and I'm going to put some field names in and give them a type of data. So the balance is the one which is going to be currency. So now I will put some data in, and so I'll change the view of the table up here, and then must save the table, why not, and I'll call it TBL names. So it's important to remember these names actually, so that we'll be able to access them later on. TBL names. Okay, so no primary key, thank you very much. Now I'll just put in some data, and there I've got my table. So if I close that, and you do recall that when we just close access tables, then they will be saved automatically. So okay. So I've got my table. I can now just close access database, and just to be sure that take a look where my database is. There it is there, test, and it's within that folder. It's probably a good idea to keep Windows Explorer open actually, and keep that aside, so you can just remind yourself where it is, and sometimes copy the path as a matter of fact. So now we'll use Excel to access. So I'll start off, and I'll put a button on the screen as we normally do, and double click on that, and we'll try to write some code. Now before we do that, we need to set a reference. Now a reference to be able to use the DAO. So we can go to Tools, References, and we need to find the Microsoft Access Database Engine object, so I can check that and click OK. Now I've safely set a reference. Now I can introduce some code. So we can start off by dim db as and you'll notice that database comes up, and we could dim out a TBL to represent the table, and we call that a record set. And you can see that exists there because we've set a reference to that. So we can now reference our database object, and notice the path name, that's not correct, that's ACCDB. MDB is a 2003 access database, so the 2007 onwards ACCDB, and that's the name of our database. We'll also set a reference to our table, which we named, as you recall, table names. And now we can manipulate the data within the table. We can move to the first record of that particular table, and now I will take the data from the table and paste it into Excel. into the first cell. Notice that notation of the exclamation mark. It takes a little bit of getting used to, actually. When you come to get into DAO, you'll find that we use an exclamation mark when we have a field name here that we have made up ourselves. If it's a property, then it would be actually a full stop in here. But that's all these sort of nuances that you need to get to grips with DAO. So if I now run that by clicking the command button, you'll see that the data is nicely placed into the cells. So you're transferring data from Access Database into Excel using DAO. There are excellent references. If you want to continue, this has just scratched the surface, obviously, if you want to continue investigations of DAO. Now, while we've got an Access Database, let's talk a little bit about SQL. I'll just save that temporarily, just in case I need it again. And I'll open up my Access Database and the previous one, which is test ACCDB, and you'll notice that I've got my table there. Now, first of all, I'm going to be able to show you how we can use SQL within a database. And Access is a good one to use to practice SQL, and I'll show you why. We need to first of all just make a query to find out, say, everyone who's got £10 in that database. So I'll quickly make a query and introduce table names and close that and bring those two field names down. And then I want to query upon, the criterion is going to be to find everyone who's got £10, and then I will then run the query, which is straightforward access. And you'll notice I've got a data set here which has just got the people with £10, and you know very well that it doesn't affect the original table. There's the original table names, and it's got the original data, and here's the query that we just made. Now we made a query using what we call a query by design grid, which is all very well, but what I'm going to do now is to take a look at the SQL associated with that. So if I go to view, and then I can have a look at the SQL view, and that's a little bit difficult to see. It says select table names dot person, table name dot balance. So they're the two columns that we says from the table itself, from table names, where table name balance is equal to 10. So this indeed is SQL. You could, bit difficult to see, but you could actually just tidy that up a bit and get rid of two of those and closing brackets, and you'll find that, well, actually that's not necessary as well. We don't need any parentheses, so you can tidy it up a bit and it'll still run as usual. Now what I'm doing now is actually changing the SQL. I know that's a little bit difficult to see, but I've typed in a 20 there. It says there where table names balance, which is the name of the field, is 20. So if I run that, you should see that I've got the person with 20. So this is how you can actually practice SQL yourself. Go to the SQL view once you've made your query, and then insert SQL in here to experiment. The book that I strongly recommend to continue with SQL is this book here, Teach Yourself. Well, that's rather ambitious, but it's a very good, succinct little book. To accompany that book, I've written a manual, and I've also got his database here. The way he sets it up using scripts, which is a little bit confusing for beginners. So I've made a database here, so you can just click on this link here to download that database, and I'll show you that in a moment. And there's my manual as well. If you want to access that, it's this manual here, and which looks a bit like this. And the advantage is that you can I should be able to show you some code in there. For example, if you go to chapter 3 in here on his book, and there's the code that I've reproduced. That's a query code. So what you can do is to use his database, which is here, and with all the tables and so on, you can just take a look at all those tables and the customers table, for example. But what you can do is to make a query to query the respective tables. So you know how to make a query. So you could go into create a new query design, and you could just make a basic blank query actually. I'll close that. I can view the SQL, but then I can just paste in the code from my notes or from his downloads, and you can see there, select product, product ID, product name from the products. Well, this is teaching about sorting. You see, we can order them by the product price and the product name. So if I were to run that query, there you are, and they're sorted according to product ID and product name respectively, etc. So it's very straightforward to be able to teach yourself some basic SQL.